Good morning, everyone. So everybody got quiet all of a sudden, and I look at my watch, and it's 10 o'clock exactly. So I guess I have to say something now. My name is Juan Monticelli, and I'm in charge of the Sustainable Energy section at the Department of Sustainable Development of the OAS. We're still waiting for Ambassador Audrey Marks from Jamaica and Ambassador Liz Thompson from Barbados. I think that not to so that we don't delay the proceedings for today, I'm going to start with an introduction to what we are going to be discussing here today, and hopefully by then we'll have our keynote speaker and our opening remarks speaker in the room. So, first of all, I would like to start by thanking Mrs. Janine Fennell, Mrs. Ruth Spencer, Mrs. Rachel Miller, Mrs. Anne-Marie Horowitz, and Mrs. Lauren Glickman for coming today to join us for this event. We're going to be hearing more from them in a few minutes when we launch the discussions. And I would like also to welcome you all. And I'm glad that we're having this discussion here. I also like to mention that this meeting is being webcast live, and the recording will be made available later today on our website, ecpaamericas.org. That's ECPAamericas.org. And if you're watching our live stream, you can send your questions to the expert panel. You can use Twitter, or you can, I was told that there is a way to communicate with us via the live stream. For more than 20 years, the OAS, through the Department of Sustainable Development, has been delivering technical support and policy advice on sustainable energy to its 34 member states. And promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency has always been our main goal. Our program has evolved through the years, and in the early years, we really focused on policy and regulation reform. And what has happened, and especially over the last 15 years, is that most countries came up with their own regulatory frameworks, their own policies, and they really made great strides to advance renewable energy and to be more efficient in using their resources. So today, now that most countries really have that basic setup, legal setup, we're really focusing much more on market transformation. So since 2009, the OAS coordinates the Technical Secretariat of the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas. We call it ECPA by its acronym. And this partnership focuses on promoting shared leadership, dialogue, and cooperation on energy across the Western Hemisphere. Over the last decades, OAS has implemented several projects under the ECPA umbrella and in partnership with the member states. More than 5,000 people have attended our activities. We've hosted approximately 120 workshops, dialogues, seminars, and technical exchanges. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's around that neighborhood. We've had activities in 30 countries in the Western Hemisphere. We supported 3 ministerials, and all of this with one single purpose in mind: promoting sustainable energy across the sector. We're currently working with Jamaica, who will be the host of the 4th ECPA Ministerial in Montego Bay next year. And we have witnessed considerable changes in the field of renewable energy and natural gas over the last 15 years. Solar, wind, and geothermal energy, which used to make marginal contributions to the power grid, are becoming staples and are the center of attention in almost every country in the Americas. Transforming the energy market in the Western Hemisphere implies becoming more sustainable, becoming more efficient, and carbon conscious, but we must not lose sight of the social aspects, and gender diversity as well as inclusion is at the core. Energy is one of the least gender diverse sectors in the economy. Closing the gender gap is vital because greater gender equity ensures a more equitable distribution of economic and social benefits, because clean energy transition requires the adoption of innovative solutions and business models, and a greater participation from a diverse talent pool. And because Sustainable Development Goal number 7 of ensuring access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy for all by 2030 demands special consideration of gender diversity issues. And also because equality is really the basic ingredient to build a society that is more just. The work of the OAS member states to ensure the participation of women in the transition to clean energy and to close the gender gap will be part of the discussions at the upcoming ECPA Ministerial meeting to convene in Montego Bay next year. With this in mind, I would like to turn it over to Ambassador Marks for her welcome remarks. Her country, as I was saying before, will host the upcoming ECPA Ministerial in Montego Bay next year on February 27, 28. Ambassador?
Thank you, Mr. Monticelli. Well, I'm sure we're all looking forward to Montego Bay in February. It'll be a very different feel than in Washington and probably most of the USA. And we are looking forward to seeing full participation. Good morning, everyone. The fourth Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, ECPA, ministerial meeting, which is scheduled to be held in Jamaica in the first quarter of 2020, is of tremendous strategic importance to Jamaica and certainly the wider Caribbean, mainly because for the first time in our region, energy will become the focus of high-level discussions, bringing together ministries of energy, climate resilience leaders, international development agencies, multilateral organizations, the diplomatic corps, and the 34 members of the OAS under one umbrella in Montego Bay, Jamaica, to work out a unified strategy on energy for the hemisphere. It was in Chile that I announced my government's decision to host the fourth ECPA Ministerial. And since that time, we have been working assiduously to ensure the success of the event. Since the announcement, we have consulted with several international and regional partners and other key stakeholders in determining the possible focus of energy ministers and climate resilience leaders when they gather in Montego Bay next year. As part of our consultations to identify the areas of focus, 2 preparatory meetings were held, one in Miami in October 2018 and the other in San Jose in April 2019. Additionally, we have been working with the members of the ECPA Steering Committee, which is comprised of 9 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, to seek the advice of government experts in the field. We have also engaged our private sector partners, and as we continue to pursue broad consultations. And let me just pause to again commend the work that Mr. Monticelli and the team are doing in terms of the ECPA Steering Committee. Our consultations have led us to identify the following areas as garnering the most interest in the hemisphere: energy efficiency, regional energy integration, natural gas, resilient energy infrastructure, electric mobility, and gender and energy, which is the focus of our meeting today. You know, in fact, I had a pretty full schedule, and I just came back from traveling last week, and I didn't intend to be here this morning, but when I really looked at the topic for today, gender and energy, it's not something that I normally see together, but therefore, anything that promotes gender equality needs our full support, especially as women leaders. So it's my pleasure to be here this morning as we look at this, as we focus on this topic. Jamaica attaches tremendous importance to the role of women in all spheres of life and national development. Therefore, we view access to energy in all its aspects as an enabling platform towards economic prosperity for women. Indeed, the invaluable contribution of women, who make up over 40% of the global workforce, cannot be underestimated. And so we welcome every effort at increasing the participation of women. In this context, through the promotion of gender equity with regard to energy access, brings with it economic and social benefits to a broader, more diverse spectrum of society. But looking around this room, it seems as if we have pretty good equalities. Most of the women in this room this morning. But there can be no denying that despite progress in women's employment in a wide cross-section of industries, as was pointed out earlier, the energy sector remains one of the least gender diverse. Closing the gender gap is vital to achieving equitable distribution of economic and social benefits, including innovative solutions in the marketplace. Ladies and gentlemen, today's dialogue will provide space to explore strategies that are effective in empowering women with respect to energy through the input and advice of multiple stakeholders as member states of the OAS prepare to convene in Montego Bay. We have with us here today a distinguished panel of women who will share their experiences and perspectives on gender and energy. These inputs will guide the agenda being put together by Jamaica for the ministerial. Mr. Chairman, as indicated by Jamaica's Prime Minister, the government is committed to making Jamaica energy secure through the use of renewable energy, particularly solar and wind energy. To further this commitment, the Prime Minister Holness has directed the government to raise the nation's target for electricity generated by renewables from 30% to 50% by the year 2030. Transitioning towards transformative energy solutions will require innovative thinking and business models. Diversifying the regional talent pool from which to draw new and innovative ideas by increased participation of women will bring the Americas a step closer to achieving a sustainable energy future. So in closing, I must express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the team in the Department of Sustainable Development, which has been with us every step of the way, ensuring that we remain on track and providing necessary advice as we so often require. Thank you. I wish you a fruitful dialogue and look forward to our continuing discussions in future ECPA dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those kind words. And we know how busy your schedule is, and we really appreciate your presence here. And I would also like to note that the Premier Mission of Jamaica, led by Ambassador Marks, has been one of the pillars of this process of getting us to the Ministerial in Montego Bay. I would like to turn it over to our keynote speaker. Now I hear that she's arrived. Yes, okay. Her name is Liz Thompson, and she's the ambassador of Barbados to the United Nations. Madam Ambassador? Maybe not. So, we are right on track. We're on time, so we can spare a few more minutes. I can tell you a little bit about what we've done, how we came up with energy and gender. And we followed a very long process where we had consultations, as the ambassador mentioned before, through preparatory meetings, and where we also have a very strong steering committee. And that, I think, is the novelty in this process that we follow under the ECPA umbrella. As opposed to most ministerial processes at the OAS, what we've done is we came up with our own process where countries who want to lead something, who want to take the lead on something relating to energy, then are able to do so using this vehicle to do it. So we've done a great deal of work on energy efficiency, with the government of Mexico. Now we're organizing a ministerial in Jamaica. We had another one also in the United States, the first one in 2010. We had our second ministerial in 2015 in Mexico, and in Viña del Mar in 2017. And each country brought their own views to this discussion. So I was mentioning Mexico with energy efficiency. Chile focused a lot on electric mobility. And in the case of the United States, well, it was the first meeting. It was the seminal event that took place here in Washington. And we had the Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu at the time. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was also at the meeting. Our former Secretary General Insulza and Luis Alberto Moreno. And that first event really cemented this process that is 10 years in the making. So now, yes, without further ado, I would like to offer the floor, or the microphone, to Ambassador Thompson. Thompson from Barbados. It is a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. I apologize. I literally just got off the train, and the train was late. They tell me that traffic is heavy here this morning, unlike New York. Well, unlike in the sense that when they tell you that traffic is heavy in New York, it is really very heavy. I didn't think it was all that heavy here. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to assume that the protocol has been established because I have no idea who is who and who is here. But it took tremendous energy for me to get here this morning. I literally had to get out of bed at 4:15 in order to catch the train and join you, but I am delighted to be able to do so from several perspectives, really, and I look forward to the discussion that will follow. In keeping with the fact that this is supposed to be a dialogue, I have not got a written text because I really want to sound a more conversational note and essentially to set the landscape for the discussion that will follow. For me, this is important. It's an important conversation as a woman. I can't say as a mother, I've not been a mother, but certainly the older you get, the more you look around at these issues and you start to wonder how much is really changing. I am an energy lawyer. I did oil and gas law with subspecialties in renewable energy. And when I decided that this is what I was going to study, people asked me, why? Why? And as someone who has been engaged on policy matters for longer than some of you in the room have been alive, it is, I regard it as important. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, or at least that is the current intention, but you know there's always a danger when you give a politician a microphone. So be warned, you can leave if Okay, so I thought that I would set the context by framing a broader picture and then talking about energy and then going back to the broader picture. Broader picture. Who was Valentina Tereshkova? Has anybody in the room ever heard of her? She was the first woman to go to the moon, and she went there in 1963. As Americans say, who would have thunk it? Marguerite Loif was a really very interesting woman. She was a scientist, did amazing research. She worked with her husband and another man in a 3-person team. She wrote brilliant papers. And she stood dressed in her stole and her gown and watched her husband receive the Nobel Prize for the work that she did.
Who would have thought that black women helped NASA send astronauts to the moon? Who would have thought? Ordinary black women whose names we never even heard. And today we talk about living in the era of the Anthropocene, the era when our behavior, our lifestyle so fundamentally affect Earth's ecosystems that we have the capacity to irrevocably alter them. But a woman named Rachel Carson told us so first. We just didn't believe her. All over the world, there are women doing amazing, groundbreaking work, unrecognized. So when you ask me to speak about women in energy, I cannot speak about women in energy outside of the broader socio-political context, because that is the construct within which women in energy work. And I'm going to ask you, please, put your phones on vibrate. Nothing in the world is going to happen that you will miss. If you put them on vibrate, you can watch the screen every now and then. You don't have to look at me at all, but spare me having to hear them going off constantly. No, I have no idea who it was. Well, no, thank you for your apology. I mean, when I say that, people glare at me like, excuse me? You're talking to me? Yeah, I am talking to you, but no, thank you so much. You are very, very gracious. But it's really very distracting, and it's particularly distracting when you don't have a script from which you're reading and you're formulating on your feet. It's a little harder. So I was making the point. See, you shouldn't have apologized, because now it's interrupted my train of thought. So I was making the point that there is a broader construct in which women in energy operate. And therefore, while we can examine what happens in relation to women in energy, it is the broader construct with which we also have to concern ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about that broader construct. All over the world, the face of poverty is predominantly female. All over the world, women are working in jobs for which they are not paid. Who looks after granny and the ailing aunt with Alzheimer's and granddad who spends his time drinking at the shop and you have to go and get him every evening, and who makes sure that the children are fed and get to school, et cetera, and who are not recognized for that, or who are not paid for that, because nobody values it. Nobody puts a dollar figure on what women are doing day in and day out to run families, and in the course of running families are running the world, really, because you are supporting so many other things, and that work is not paid. Women own a minority of properties. In addition to that, women, for instance, a large percentage of what we eat comes from women farmers who have no right of ownership of the land that they farm, so often they are tossed off of it. In the University of the West Indies, and I know there are Caribbean people in the room, we see women graduating in very large numbers, and we have a perspective that it's all good, but it is not, because when you do the deep dive into the statistics, and I did it for a lecture that I did last year, women are working for less than men, 60 cents to the dollar in the Caribbean, 80 cents to the dollar in the United States, and all the figures in between across the world. In Asia Pacific, less than that. Although women are graduating in larger numbers than men from the University of the West Indies, they are not being employed first. We see them in certain professions, teaching, law perhaps, but they are not the majority in the workplaces. They get the jobs last, and then they're not paid equitably. When it comes to STEM, the numbers of women are very low. There's a very interesting statistic that 4.8% of boys when polled will tell you that they expect a career in ICT. 0.4% of girls will tell you that they expect a career in ICT. And let's look at the broad statistics, and I find them very interesting. The percentage of women in the labor force in 1990 was 51.4. In 2018, it was 48.5. For men, that was 80% in 1990 and 75% in 2018. But it allows you to see the disparity and the differential of women in the workplace versus men in the workplace. Fortune 500 companies are led by 24 women, 4.8%. And I already spoke about the pay gap. Now I like to be anecdotal, so I'm going to give you two stories, but I want to refer you to two studies on which I'm going to rely. One is an index by the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, Women in the Power and Utilities Industries, Energy and Utilities, and the second document is one by Irina called Renewable Energy, a Gender Perspective. So we are talking about energy, and I'm using some very good information and very current information on energy. So I'm gonna, when we get there, I'm just gonna say the IDB study or the IRENA study and not give you the name again, okay? Boston University. When I was a politician for a very long time. In fact, I still think of myself as a politician. The electorate didn't, but I do. When I was a politician, it was my experience that when we helped women get jobs, you could see the difference in the household. The furniture was nicer. The children dressed better. They went out more. They were getting lessons. So the money was being spent in the household. When I helped young men get jobs or men get jobs, well, the fellas dressed better. They went to more social events. They acquired a new girlfriend or two because they had cash. And of course, girls need to get their hair done and their nails done, and they had money to spend on the women. The money was not spent in the household. Now, I thought that that was peculiar to the demographic of my constituency, but I discussed it with other politicians. Same experience. And then I figured, well, this got to be a Caribbean phenomenon. This is how black men behave. Boston University did a study and discovered exactly the same thing. And I'm making that point as my point of departure to say that when you bring women into the labor force, children are taught better. Families are treated better. You see tangible, visible, measurable improvement. In fact, as part of this study, the IDB looked at the 200 top utilities in the world, and they found that the 20 that were the most diverse, that had the most women in them, were in fact the 20 top performing utility companies. And Ernst & Young has now done a study which has been published, which speaks to that fact, diversity in the workplace, and measures it against output, results, productivity, performance, and profitability. And it tells you exactly what my experience was as a politician on the ground, that when you make sure that women are looked after, the society and the economy benefit. There is no business in the world in which you would use part of your resources and would be congratulated for ignoring resources that were available to you, for not maximizing on resources, except human development and human life, where we choose to write women off and not properly utilize them, and therefore are not getting maximum benefit. So it is not my saying it because I'm a woman. There is now clear evidence based on research with empirical data that when you bring women in, there is an exponential benefit. Thank you. So good to have a man around to help me. Okay, so let me give you now some of the data relating to the utility companies. And this is the IDB study. I've just given you some broad data for the workplace generally. Utility companies across the world have 5% female board members, 16% executive and non-executive board members, 14% in senior management. In renewable energy, the percentage of women employed is 32%, with a majority of them working in administration. In oil and gas, the figure is 22%. And the growth rate is largely stagnant. In fact, there's another statistic that I have here that I want to share with you because it really is shocking. IDB estimates that based on current trends, and I've indicated that the growth pattern has been stagnant, the rate of change of women into the labor force in oil and gas, in renewable energy, is 1% every 3 years. So on current trend, it would take 42 years to reach 30% of women in energy at senior levels, and 72 years to reach 40%. That's the data. So that is where we are. Now, I wanted to give you, because of the nature of this room, some breakdown by region. At the level in North America and Canada, 7% are of women. So you know we're talking about women. So when I say 7%, 7% of women are at the level of executive director, and 23% in the business generally. In Europe, the figures are also 7 to 23%. In Africa, 9% in senior management, 6% at executive level, and 16% overall at 16% at board level, beg your pardon, but only 6% in the labor force. Asia Pacific, senior management, 12%, board, 3%, labor force, 12%. Latin America and the Caribbean, 7% at the level of non-executive director, 9% at the level of executive director, 17% at senior management level, 9% at board level, 17% at senior management level. So that is the geographic spread. There is another study that, and I will try to share it with you if I can remember the name. So it is clear that the numbers in energy are even less than the numbers in the wider labor force, the distribution of women working in the energy sector, whether it is oil and gas, utility companies, or renewable energy companies. The statistics are not at all encouraging. Latin America and the Caribbean, for some reason, and I have not been able to explore it, but would like to do so, or perhaps this room can, has more women at the executive board level than it has in the general labor force. So clearly, for some reason, they're bringing women onto the boards, not in large numbers, but they're not employing them. And it is interesting that the women who are on these boards are clearly not encouraging employment of other women in the broader labor force. And I make that assumption, it's a deduction, based on the fact that the figures in the labor force have remained constant. So even though the boards, the optics have changed, what is happening inside the organization remains largely the same. Of the 200 top utilities across the world, assuming 8 board members per utility company, and some companies have 6, some have 10 members, so I've done an average of 8. That's 1,600 people in the top 20 200 utilities across the world. Only 25 are women, so that's roughly 10%. For those of you who do math very quickly, you can work down to the last percentage, but roughly 10% for me. So, those are the figures. And it made me ask the question, what are the barriers to women entering energy professions, whether it is renewable energy, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's the utility companies? And I started with the answer that, one, there is a poor STEM pipeline. But if I stepped back for a moment and acknowledged the fact that there are 62 million girls across the world who are out of school, you can't get to STEM if you're not in school. So let's start there. That if the girls are still not being educated in large numbers, if they have no access to secondary or tertiary education, they aren't getting near STEM. And if they don't get to STEM, they cannot make the other step to the utility company. So you start with a very narrow pipeline. And why is it that women don't go into STEM? There is a theory that women are not good at math and that we are not good at spatial assessments. Feminist theorists, however, argue that it really has to do not with output, but with input, in the sense that people learn differently. And therefore, if you teach people at different rates and in different ways, you are going to have the same output or similar output, but the methodology that you will get there by, or that you use to get there, is entirely different. Feminists also argue, very cogently in my view, that boys play differently from girls, or are encouraged to play. So when I sit with my doll, I have no spatial context. The doll is there, it's close to my breast, it's close to my heart, like my baby would be. But my brother goes into the yard and he has the field, the football field, and he has to gauge how long it is going to take him if he positions his foot at a particular angle to move the ball from here to there. Spatial context. So the way in which we are nurtured impacts how then we learn And when we go into the school with the dull experience as opposed to the football field experience, we respond differently to the information that is given to us. So we have to change how we teach. It is also a question of perception. Madame Curie belongs to a very rare group of people who got 2 Nobel Prizes. She got the Nobel Prize for chemistry and she got the Nobel Prize for physics, but she nearly did not get it. She and her husband were partners, and he was offered the Nobel Prize, and he was clearly a very rare man. He said, no, my wife and I do this work together, and if you're going to give me the Nobel, you have to give her as well. And that's how she got her first Nobel Prize, because her husband insisted that she was worthy. So there is a perception, and it happens all the time, where female scientists, no matter how much they produce, don't get tenure, they don't get it quickly in the university system, they're not recognized in the same way, the work is not pushed. I mean, how many of you know that a Black Caribbean woman who is probably only about 50 years old discovered a gene which she named the Kaiso gene after Caribbean music, which predisposes women to breast cancer? A few years ago in Canada. How many people know this? So the point that I'm making is that our perception of a scientist and an innovator and somebody who is an engineer and a mathematician, they don't fit into skirts. They wear slacks and they don't have boobs. They don't. That's not how we see them. That's not what's in our heads. So because we have a perception is pushing cultural norms and behaviors. And therefore, perception prejudices women. And so you will say, but I want to be a doctor. And somebody will say, well, wouldn't you like to teach? Or something like that. And we've all had these kinds of experiences or know people who have. So, you know, I don't believe that I need to elaborate further. So the STEM pipeline is poor. And because the STEM pipeline is poor, the professions in oil and gas, geology, engineering, etc., don't have a good feeder base. Second, I think that while we talk about gender mainstreaming, that we really don't gender mainstream at all. To what extent does our planning in business, even in international organizations, to what extent is it underpinned by putting a gender lens on an issue? Women also still, because they are the primary caregivers, have to look after children, pick up children from school, deal with homework, cook, do domestic care, look after families. Invariably, they are the caregiver, even to their spouses' relatives. So that business places that tend to have child care facilitation will tend to have more women, or that allow flexi time will tend to have more women. And women performing better because they have the nimbleness, the maneuverability to perform their other roles that are still critical in our society. Without gender sensitivity, without gender mainstreaming, there are a whole heap of issues. That's so loose. There are a plethora of issues that we miss considering merely because we are not applying a gender lens. And I'm not going to elaborate because I'm conscious that I said 20 minutes and I should have been counting. I've not been counting. So I'll start to count now. There is a lot of diversity policies in utility companies. A friend who is an engineer said to me that she worked in the Caribbean for a European utility. And when she went to her interview, she performed well. She was exceptionally well qualified. They said to her, well, we're going to give you the job because our rules require that we employ X% women, but we know that you aren't going to stay. And she was dismissed. That was the end of the interview. You've got the job, but she's still there. So that companies do not have conscious and deliberate diversity policies and policies that target getting women in. They simply shrug and say, well, women don't do science. There are not that many women engineers around. Can't find them, as if they don't exist. I would be, well, I'll get to that in the solutions part. Then there is the fact that there is a discouraging climate in many business cultures for women. Women actually have to go through, in some businesses, hazing rights, or the equivalent of hazing rights, in order to be accepted by the men, to be seen as one of the boys, to get along in the workplace. I mean, it is so in the military, it's so in many male-dominated professions, including politics. There is, too, the fact that there is limited mobility and limited opportunity. There is evidence that even when women are in the workplace, their opportunities are not the same. Here, I'll give you a story. So there's a university, and I read it, and I never remember which university. There's a university that did a study. I told you just now about the one, Boston University. They did a study on hiring practices and HR, and they were noticing that women, even when exceptionally qualified, were not being employed at the same rate as men, and they were trying to find out what was happening in the interviewing process that these women were not getting the jobs. So they did a blind test. They brought women in. They were put before an interviewing panel. The examiners stood back. They watched the interviews. On every occasion, the women scored more poorly than the men, even when, in the examiner's opinion, the women had outscored the men or outperformed the men in the interview process. And so they decided that they would make it a blind test. You would do an interview, but the voices would be disguised, and they wouldn't let the panel be seen. The panel wouldn't know who they're interviewing. They would ask the same questions. They're really trying to make it as objective and standardized as possible. Same result. And then they worked out. They did it, repeated it with another set of women and panel, and got a completely different result. The women scored as they expected them to, based on performance and what they saw in the interview process. And I know that nobody can tell me what they did differently to get that result. They simply asked all of the applicants to enter the room barefooted so that the high heels could not be heard. That was the bias, that the interviewers were picking up when women were coming because they heard their high heels. So that my takeaway from that is that even when you think you have systems set up and you say female applicants are encouraged, there are inherent biases that you are not even aware of that are working against your female candidates. How do you clean the system up? We still have, let's face it, an all-boys network where women are home looking after granny and little one. Men are still playing golf and at the club and wherever it is men meet, at watching basketball and football and in the rum shop in the Caribbean or in the bar after work on Friday nights, et cetera, et cetera. So they are making connections. And invariably, when an opportunity comes up, because of the positions they hold, they are in a position to say, well, John is a great guy. We play golf every Saturday now. John may be a great guy and a great golfer, but is he the ideal person for this job? I don't know, but the point is that John has somebody who is willing to call his name and position him for the opportunity. Your friend, like you, is at home looking after Granny and little one. So there's nobody to call your name. And that's the reality, that at that level, because there are so many men dominating in terms of numbers, that there continues to be an old boy network. So the glass ceiling comes as a result of a number of factors and in relation to a number of ways. I was making the point earlier about the data across the Caribbean and the difference and that women are still a second class. You know, in Barbados, the common entrance exam, which prepares you for high school, women, girls, have to get higher marks than boys. That's a reality. So to get into the same schools, the girls have to score higher. In some countries in the Caribbean, a woman cannot take her child outside of the Caribbean without her husband's permission. That's the law. In our parliaments, we still have 15% and under female representation. So again, I go back to the barriers and the landscape. If there is nobody at the table who is sensitive to the issues, that it is not going to be put on the table. When it was decided, issues like abortion rights and issues like healthcare, predominantly older men are making these decisions without women at the table. But there are decisions that impact us. And I am not making a comment here about US politics, simply the reality of what takes place. There's the absence of mentorship and role models, lack of childcare facilities, and so on. And so I move now to, having drawn that broad, to my final points, which really speak to some suggestions and solutions, because I didn't think that I could have this conversation with you unless I actually thought and spoke of some of the things that I think we need to do to address the difficulties. Let me commend, first of all, WIRE, Women in Renewable Energy, which is a Clinton Foundation initiative, because it looks for women who are trained or work in the area of renewable energy and pairs them with young women and says, mentor them so that they get to the point where they can lead or where they remain in the organization, where they're not excluded, where they feel that they have got to the table and that they deserve the seat. They don't second guess themselves. And that's something that women do all the time, and it impacts part of how they perform. They pull back and second guess. Men never do that. Rightly or wrongly, they make the step. So I'm commending WIRE. I think that we have to insist that, and I say that because I was a WIRE mentor, and I know the work they do, and the point that I'm making is that we need conscious, deliberate activism and advocacy, and it has to come from organizations such as that to help to put pressure on governments and to help to make a difference, particularly at the level of the private sector. I made the point in the earlier discussion about the teaching of STEM subjects, and that clearly is a solution, that we teach boys and girls STEM subjects in different ways. Affirmative action is a valid approach in the Nordic countries. There are more women on boards, there are more women in senior executive positions because they have quota systems and affirmative action programs. And I am not afraid of picking up flotsam and jetsam because you have exceptionally well-trained women out there who are competent and capable of performing at the highest levels. And as I indicated, the evidence shows that when you do bring women in, that the company performance changes. We have to be sensitive to workplace culture. Often in the Caribbean and in Latin America, we tend to be very informal. So we come and we don't have a problem hugging up a woman. Hugging up is very big. Hugging a woman, touching her in ways that may be appropriate. Telling her, girl, the red dress you had on yesterday looks so good. But this is how we behave. So there has to be a culture. What is appropriate behavior in the workplace? How do we make our women comfortable or uncomfortable? And a lot of companies in the Caribbean and Latin America have no rules relative to workplace culture and behavior. So men get away with all kinds of things. All kinds of things happen in the workplace. We have to fix our wider social problem. I started by saying that energy is a subset of the wider society and economy, and unless you deal with the broader issue, you can't get to energy. It's not a standalone. So let us recognize some of the broader issues to which I spoke and deal with them. I think we have to say to businesses what the value proposition is of having women. They don't see it as a profitability issue. If it is framed in that context, then they're far more likely to take it on board. I believe also that utility companies should be encouraged by governments. In the Caribbean, for instance, there are a lot of utility companies with long 90-year contracts, and there are monopolies, and they should be encouraged to help the teaching of STEM subjects in school, to pay for lessons for girls, and to develop a pipeline. What are the mechanisms that we can put in place as international organizations or government to improve hiring practices and to widen the pipeline so that there is a throughput from which utility companies or energy companies generally can draw? The solutions, like the problem, are there, and the issue can be fixed. What we have to determine is to what extent do we really want to fix it. And women in positions of power need to open the door and let other women in, or to make sure that other women come in. We cannot go on behaving as if the human enterprise is different from any other, where we undervalue or ignore a substantial amount of our resources and think that this is satisfactory, that we can continue to do so, and that all will be well, or that we will get the best possible outcome. I look forward to hearing your discussions and to the suggestions which you will throw out. It is interesting that 75% of men feel that there are absolutely no barriers to women getting into energy or to anything else, that the problem is the women themselves. 40% of men think that there is no problem. 40% of men think that there is absolutely no problem, other than our perception. So that brings us, or brings me, to the final point. What is our perception of the issue? On what is that perception based? Is it false or factual? And if false, how do we change it? I believe that we start to change it by discussions such as this, where we have data that is empirical, and where we are willing to honestly face the problem and collaboratively work for solutions. And I look forward to doing exactly that with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ambassador. Oof. You've given us a lot to think about, and I really appreciate your comment. I would like to ask if you could share the links or the info about those reports that you've mentioned. We would like to post them on our website so that the participants today can take a look and maybe download or take a read at these documents. And I would like to now invite our panelists to the podium. We have Janine Fennell, Ruth Spencer, Rachel Miller, Anne-Marie Horowitz, and Lauren Glickman. And if we can sit in that order, that would make things easier for me as we moderate the panel. Thank you. If we can put the slides on for Janine and get ready. If we have, I don't know, do we have any other presentations for today or just Janine's?
I have one.
Okay, so if we can get them ready to make sure that as the speakers make their interventions, we have them on screen. So, we had a pretty interesting keynote speech here, so that gives us a lot of to talk about and to cover, and I hope you're ready for that. I would like to introduce you then to our panelists. I would like to start with Janine Fennell, and she's the Executive Director of Leaders in Energy, which is a global action network to advance clean energy and sustainable solutions for a more sustainable energy system, economy, and world. Janine is the founder of Leaders in Energy, and she also worked, she held several positions. She worked at a state energy office. She was a foreign service officer at USAID, worked with IBM, DINCOR International, the Institute of Energy Analysis, the US Departments of Energy and Agriculture, the electric utility industry, and several NGOs. Janine plays a managing role in several associations and councils focused on the promotion of gender diversity and equality. Next, we have Ruth Spencer. In her native country of Antigua and Barbuda, she's the national coordinator for the GEF Small Grants Program at UNDP. And Ruth is an international development economist from Yale University, and she's a leader and an advocate for climate resilience and renewable energy in the Caribbean. Her efforts in the promotion of solar energy have led to the installation of PV systems in 10 communities in Antigua and Barbuda. And Ruth has won actually several awards for her work. Next, we have Rachel Miller. She is a partner at Forbes State, where she leads the firm's energy practice. She joined the Forbes State as a senior vice president in 2012. She has 16 years of corporate regulatory and congressional experience in energy and environment. Rachel served as vice president of energy and environment practice at Capital Solutions. She was also director of federal affairs at BP America, and she served also as a legislative assistant for Senator Feinstein of California, and also served in the House of Representatives as a legislative assistant for Congressman Eliot Engel of New York. She currently serves as president of the Women's Energy Network and is a past president and founder of the DC chapter of WEN. Next, we have Anne-Marie Horowitz, and she's the director of STEM Rising at the Office of Public Affairs of the U.S. Department of Energy. Anne-Marie created and directs this, the STEM program, the STEM Rising program, to showcase DOE's STEM outreach programs. She also founded POWER, which is Professional Opportunities for Women in Energy Realized. She also created Women at Energy series featuring profiles of DOE personnel in STEM careers. well, she has a very extensive curriculum. And then she also was a designee to the White House Council on Women and Grids. And finally, we have Lauren Glickman. She's the managing partner at Renewed.com. She has over a decade of experience in clean energy and climate change advocacy and a successful track record for implementing winning social media and online strategies. She won several awards for her work in the clean energy industry, including a spot on Solar 100 ranking of the most influential leaders in the solar energy. So, the way the panel is gonna happen, so we're gonna have the panel discussion will address challenges and opportunities, gender and energy issues, and then each panelist will have 15 minutes, and then the audience will have an opportunity for questions and answers. So, Janine. Yes. Yes, we can start with the presentation. So my question really is, how can women speed up the energy transition, and how can we enhance the access of women to leadership positions in the energy sector?
Very good. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with my presentation, and I just want to say what an honor it is to be here today and to set this stage on such a wonderful discussion. Thank you to the OAS for organizing this, and so interesting that this is going on for 10 years. I think you said in your introductory remarks. Wow, okay. So just what I want to do is really focus on how can women speed up the energy transition. And I also want to thank Ambassador Thompson. You kind of stole my thunder. You're sort of a trailblazer. I just love, love, love a lot of the statistics that you mentioned, the IRENA report, and I'll be talking a little bit about that too. So thank you for setting the stage. So what I want to do is just really quickly, got about 10 to 12 minutes here. I want to just start by, I've worked in the energy sector for many years. I'm a baby boomer, so, have gone through, some of the trials and tribulations, in the 80s and maybe even the 70s, and I have seen a lot of changes. We still have a long way to go. But I just want to quickly, talk about my experience. Then I want to bring in data, kind of that big picture that the ambassador was talking about, and see, how can we increase women's participation in the energy industry, and then my observations, my experience, and can help guide the Montego Bay process, whatever little input I can have to help leverage the larger discussion. So I'm just going to kind of fly through some of these real quickly in terms of my own personal background. I mean, how many of you in this audience knew what you wanted to do, like maybe in 3rd grade or something like that? I certainly didn't. I really didn't know for the longest time what I really wanted to do when I grew up. So I just discovered my North Star in graduate school. I heard about this economist, E.F. Schumacher, small is beautiful. Economics as if people mattered. Wow, what a concept. He talks about appropriate technology and how technology should really be focused at the community scale. Ownership and that kind of thing. So it really launched my trajectory on methane digesters in India as an alternative energy source. At that time, they were burning a lot of cow dung, women having lung issues in the home, burning the dung, so it wasn't being used as a fertilizer. So this was an alternative path. So that really launched me. And then just quickly, as Juan was mentioning, just, I've worked in a variety of it had a lot of great opportunities. One of my first jobs out of graduate school was to write a book, manual on energy management and agriculture. And I want to come back to that later because that was really kind of an important opportunity that I had that really had to do with policy that had been passed several years before I even got out of graduate school. So the programs, the money was available when I showed up. So that's really important, that overall policy framework. So have worked on agriculture, sustainability, biofuels, biopower, worked in a power industry, mainly have been involved as a researcher, writer, program analyst, private sector, domestic experience as well, state office as Juan mentioned. So just putting some of these things up there in terms of my private-public experience in the energy sector, to just kind of help us in our deliberation today, and now a nonprofit executive in terms of founding Leaders in Energy, building a community of leaders to advance clean energy and sustainable solutions. I've also served on the board of Council for Women in Energy Environmental Leadership, which is a division of Association of Engineers. energy engineers to support the role of women in the energy and environmental industries. And it's really kind of neat. I don't know how many of you are located here in the DMV region, but we've conducted 5 all-women panels at major universities here, George Washington, University of Maryland, George Mason, with panelists featuring women in energy and sustainability careers. How are they making an impact, and how can they help others? And you know, we have men and women at these as well. So I mean, we can all learn from one another. And I just wanted to show you that middle picture there because one of our sessions, we had the first woman in the United States to get her doctorate in nuclear engineering, and she earned it from MIT. She's the middle woman there on that panel. We also had Dr. Elaine Ulrich, Anne-Marie, I don't know if you know Elaine, from the Sunshot program, and we had Joanne Ivanek, who has a law background, and she runs the Advanced Biofuels Association. So really tried to have that spectrum. Anyhow, I'm going to run really quickly. Also, leaders in energy, we're trying to help propel the energy transition, the green economy. So we've conducted 6 annual Green Jobs events where we bring in economic development officers and also people in our Leaders in Energy group on how did you get a green job? How can we help others transition into this green economy? So I guess what I really want to focus on is how can women speed up the energy transition? You see a woman there. We are the clean energy revolution. I don't know how many of you have been marching, but I did go to the climate march, you know, and we can get into that later. But I just really feel that there are a variety of ways that we can really make a difference here. So, do you like this slide? You think there's enough information on here? I decided to make kind of an infographic out of this great article that was in Forbes magazine 2 weeks ago on can women speed up the energy transition. I was so excited. I sent this over to Arianda, and I said, hey, you know what? I think that's what I really want to focus on here, because this woman, who's the Wood Mackenzie director, Valentina, another Valentina. I know you mentioned Valentina, who had landed on the moon, I guess, earlier in the 60s. But Valentina Kretschmar, who's the director of corporate research for Wood Mackenzie, an analytics consulting company, says, is there a lack of diversity here in oil and gas industry? And you think if we get more women in there, we might be able to really, you know, start changing things in terms of these legacy companies. Is this holding back the energy transition? And, you know, here's that IRENA report, 22% of share of women in oil and gas workforce. And she says, can solving the industry's woman problem solve the world's human-made problem? So it really intrigued me. And I guess she says in terms of climate change research, there are statistics that show that more women are really kind of getting it in terms of the environment. So if we get that increased gender diversity, it can really help us move forward. And in terms of those of you interested in the power industry, there's another woman here that talks about the energy industry's power problem, too few women. Just wanted to bring this slide in. I was at an International Energy Forum 2 weeks ago, and there's a person there that does deep listening of all of these sectors, and he said there's no other category on the planet more dead smack in the middle of the entire global consciousness than energy. We are in the right place, we are at the right time, and there's so much that needs to be done. As you can see, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals and a whole just kind of drumbeat of scientists and others saying we need to accelerate the energy transition. So how can we, in this unique time and place, bring all these issues together, and women, in terms of climate justice and just needing to transform our entire economy and society? How do we do this? There is this larger institutional framework. We kind of need to look at which countries are achieving the greatest gender parity. So a little maybe hard to read there, but the top 10 do tend to be the Nordic countries, Iceland, but Nicaragua was the 5th. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They were looking at health, education, economic participation, and politics. And what I wanted to do was also share with you Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of gender equity. I noticed Costa Rica was in the top 25. They're ranked at 22, and I'm going to come back to that later. I'm trying to see, you know, I don't think Barbados was listed in it. Oh, they are 21. Okay, pardon me. And, hey, where do you think the United States was? Hey, it's kind of embarrassing. We're after Mexico. We're 51. So it's like, really? Okay. So in terms of gender equity in energy sector, Iceland was number one. I was in Iceland just 2 weeks ago and 3 years ago, and I heard the head of Reykjavik Energy talking about gender equality in the energy sector, and it was phenomenal. He talks about what they're doing to get more women into management, what they're doing to reduce that gender pay gap, and he says it's stupid to leave 50% of the world's population out of creating solutions. He was just amazing, and he was a man. And, we need those men to open doors and to really make changes and get more women to do so as well. Hey, now, which countries are fostering an effective energy transition? This is also a World Economic Development report. They've only been doing it in the last 2 years because I thought, okay, we need more women for the energy transition. Which countries are really rocking it in terms of moving us towards its effective transition? So it turns out Sweden is number one. And I thought I'd also, they broke it down to Latin America and the Caribbean. So you've got Uruguay, Costa Rica, Chile, Colombia, Panama as the top. But I thought this might be an interesting research project for someone here, because I think Costa Rica is at the top for gender parity, and they're at the top for making the transition. How do we bring this together? So that might be something that you want to look at, Juan, in Montego Bay. Just a thought. Okay, real quickly, Liz, the ambassador, talked about this excellent report on how all these jobs can be increased in the renewable energy industry, but it does say that, we got to get, this needs to be more equitable for everyone, including women as well. I'm not going to dwell on this. The ambassador already talked about, the lack of the STEM background, barriers to entry retention for women in the energy sector. One thing I will mention, do you see lack of STEM? We always hear about STEM, but it was kind of interesting. Ambassador, I don't know if you saw this or not, but there's a lack of a STEM background. And I thought, what does that mean? And I think they were saying there that sometimes women feel they have to have a STEM background or they can't get involved in energy. And I just want to say, no, that's not really true. That I think other women on this panel, not necessarily having a hardcore science background, mine was more of a softer. Is there like a small S STEM for social science, economics? I belong to Association of Energy Engineers, and I didn't know for the longest time that you didn't have to be an engineer to join. You could be an architect, you could be a lawyer, you could be an economist, anyone that worked in energy. So, keep that open too. I just wanted to bring that up. Self-perception, this idea of how are we perceiving ourselves? Here's a really neat book, Bright Sparks. Did you know this talks about 50 inventions made by women of all ages and from all backgrounds, and the first computer programmer was a woman. It turns out 176 years ago, Ada Lovelace, did this computing algorithm. So, kind of to your point on, hey, how are we kind of envisioning, how do we see ourselves? So, solutions, and then I'm about done here. Solutions, there were 6 of them that were mentioned in the IRENA report. First of all, MIT. Did you know like 50% of their people in their mechanical department, mechanical engineering department are women now? So that was really neat. That compares to like 13% nationwide. And they're really just, and I think Anne-Marie can maybe talk more about this, how to get more women in STEM. King's College London has women in science scholarships. Engineers Canada, quotas are another thing. They have a goal, 30% more female engineers licensed by 2030 in Canada. France, Germany, Norway, quotas for corporate boardrooms. And then flexible work schedules. In terms of mainstreaming, seeing more women working in STEM. And then networking, that whole network. And I know Seawheel, the board I've been involved in, they're working to get more women on the boards of the Association of Engineer Chapters. So lastly, just to sum it up, and I don't have to go into this in a great deal, we can do this more in a Q&A, but I guess I wanted to just, in terms of my career, what really helped me, I think the importance of federal, state, and local policies, pass those programs, pass the policy, pass the program, get the money to hire people. I think that just really makes an incredible difference. I'm hoping that the Green New Deal can really jumpstart a lot more in terms of moving us ahead on a green economy. Has anyone read Naomi Klein's book on fire? The burning case for the Green New Deal? It was written up in the Washington Post, and I got to get my own copy, but she really makes the case for the transformation of the economy to include climate justice and racial disparities and health care and all kinds of things. She said, we got to go for it, and we don't have a lot of time. workplace policies was already touched on. Benefiting from male sponsors. I had a lot of men who really helped me. And, you hear about male mentors or mentors in general, but sponsors that can really help you get the jobs, that really is important too. Education, helping others, volunteering is a nice way too. So anyhow, I'm sure I'm past my time, and thank you so much for listening, and we can do more discussion. But I wanted to set the stage. I'm the first speaker, and I thought it'd be nice to pull in some statistics as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janine. And you mentioned something in the end there about male sponsors, male mentors, and I think this is important.
Make you feel good.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I was feeling lonely. But no, I think this is a discussion about gender issues, about women, but I think there is a space here for men, and men should be also part of the solution since they're clearly part of the problem. So anyway, so moving on to our next speaker, Ruth. Go ahead. Tell us your experience in Antigua and Barbuda in the field of renewables.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. I like to hold it because I may move around. My story, I am very committed to human development. And wherever I see the need, I respond. I am very passionate about the work I do. Several years ago, when I finished university, I went back home, and even though my background was economics, I saw the agricultural sector as contributing the least to development, and a lot of women were involved in it. And I was able, that was years ago, to reach out to a company in Martinique and Guadeloupe, Sunwit Energies, and they provided us with a wind energy system. And it was set up right where the old sugar mill was, because all the research had been done in those days of key locations around the island where wind was. And that was my first attempt in energy. Now, today, the last 10 years, energy costs been going up so much. In Antigua, on our utility bills, we are paying about 50 cents US per kilowatt. And you know what that does? Many families are disconnected from the grid. You know the social implications of that? When you don't have electricity, you have children, you can't iron their uniform, you can't do their homework. And I'm beginning to wonder if that's why many of our young men leave the house, they go out to the corners, to Lime where there's a street light, and sometimes they get involved with the wrong company. Using drugs. Many do things, end up in prison. And so when the Prime Minister Brown came into government in 1914, he had to pass a policy for amnesty to forgive the many families who were disconnected from the grid, couldn't pay their light bills, and it was thousands of millions of dollars that the government exercise to put people back onto the grid. So apart from the social implications, we have the greenhouse gases. My background has always taught me that when you're looking at policies, you always look at alternatives. What are the social costs? What are the social benefits for a particular policy, and not just being driven by political means. So several years ago, the government invested through a Chinese loan in a fossil fuel plant. And I'm telling you that the situation isn't improving. We have some renewable systems and government structures. We have a big system at the airport. But my focus is where does the people, how does it benefit the people? How do people be able to get systems on their homes that can drop their electricity bills? Because in my country, the temperature is so hot. Every morning, I check my reading, and I see the heat has pushed my production over. I'm expecting so much. it's over. And I feel good that I am contributing to, you know, a good carbon footprint. But I have to think about the other members of the community. In 2008, when we had the Cricket World Cup coming to the country, the government offered incentives to many private enterprises to build structures. I was one of those persons that constructed a facility to host, you know, the millions of people that were promised to come to the island just to watch cricket. And I'm telling you, when I started taking in people, I saw some electricity bills as high as 8,000 EC a month, 3,000. And when you're having visitors who you're renting to, you need air conditioning that pushes the bill up. And every red cent that I had was going to pay utility bills. And I knew sooner or later I was going to get disconnected. So I was given information about the EU Caribbean export. They had a call that would benefit local businesses. And I wrote that proposal and I shared my story from my heart. And I believe they understood what I was saying, how I was coping, facing high energy bills, you know, trying to keep your businesses operational. I was becoming very uncompetitive. And I got the results that I was awarded this grant. And that changed my whole situation. But as the minister said, as the other panelists said, when we have these successes, we can't keep them for ourselves. So some announcement went on the radio station and I was asked to come on and I began to share. And that just generated a lot of emails, people coming to my house. They were wondering how an ordinary person could have this kind of success and they wanted to be a part of this as well. And I began to reach out, you know, I spoke with government officials where sources of funding could come to help many small businesses because high energy cost makes you uncompetitive. You can't stay afloat. You can't really make a profit. Small hoteliers were coming, business persons. Ms. Spencer, can you help us to get such a system so that we can have, you know, lower our energy costs? And my answer was when the OAS had a call for proposals. Richard Huber, he was the one I related with. And this proposal enabled me to get the funding to set up 10 systems in the communities. What we did, we used community churches. Churches, people go to church, and churches have numbers. So when you're doing the public education and awareness, you're reaching large amounts of people. And people began to buy in. People began to buy in. We even did a system for the people with disabilities. And, you know, people were really, but then how do you move on from that stage? You need the financing. And the banks weren't really open to be lending. They want so much collateral. And who has the collateral? It's not the ordinary people. The big collateral comes from, you know, the private sector businesses. So here was I just trying to do the outreach, networking with partners. When I go to meetings, I would share. And one or two donor agencies would like your story. They reach out to you in your audience. There were students who want to really come to your island and listen, see what's happening. And so just from sharing, I've had 5 PhD students come to the island and they write their research, their theses on local appropriate technologies that can be applicable. Now, when we're thinking about energy, we have to think about the linkages with the other sectors. I'm sure all of us have read the scientist report from the IPC, Biodiversity, IPBES, and the land degradation report came out. And it's showing that if we don't curb this high usage of greenhouse gases, our biodiversity, our global planet is really at risk with so much millions of species being extinct. So what role do I play? I do not think in isolation. Antigua is a small country. I have to link energy with the other sectors because the high greenhouse gases affects us. The hurricanes, the drought in my country. When you have a drought, what it is, people are suffering, animals are suffering, they have to move from their habitats. Even the waters, our oceans, our people, our fishermen that derive a livelihood, when the waters are so hot, the fishes are moving to cooler waters, it affects your whole cycle of things. And one of the things, one of my greatest challenges is in the waste management sector. And because we don't have the best practices where everything goes to the landfill and is buried, when you pass, you see the methane rising. You know what that contributes to? Air pollution, families living around the landfill. And I have committed in myself that I can no longer sit down and wait. I work with a lot of groups and individuals around the country, and I'm very proactive. And just like the OAS is having dialogues, I conduct dialogues in my country too, and I invite the local community groups to come out because people have a lot of knowledge and skill set. Sometimes we are always waiting for somebody to come and give us some money and do something for us, where we can use the knowledge of the local people, especially in our adaptation programs, to find solutions. And I'm telling you, I'm a one-person thing, but I've been able to move fast because I have the contributions and the knowledge from the local people with me in the journey. And we've been able to do many local events that the work is recognized and valued by the government. And going forward, we have a national energy policy. It's on the government website, but it has not gone to the stage where it has been, the consultation process. And I'm saying to myself, when I go home, I have to speak with Ambassador Challenger to see if we can get this document out in the country, in the communities, so that people can have a say in the processes. Antigua was the first country to sign on to the Escazú Agreement. I'm sure everybody from Latin America knows access to information, consultations. And when you have these things happening, you build a stage for local ownership and buy-in, so that when you plan your programs and projects, you can move swiftly. Many times when you plan without the input of the people, you get the funds, you have no implementation, but once you involve people, once you bring them to the table, once you hear their views, you get things moving. And something else that's very important in Antigua is that as I said, we suffer from drought. So the APA told us recently that they had to close down some of the wells because, we had a group of rastas that had poor sanitary practices, so that was affecting. So can you imagine you're suffering a drought and you still have to close a well? So in the challenges, you look for opportunities. So now I'm working with this group to design a climate resilient structure, but that is powered by biogas. So we had somebody who had studied in Cuba contribute to the process. And in all the areas in Antigua, as I said, I'm committed to people development. Where I see a challenge, I want to turn it into an opportunity. And so at my facility now, I am opening it up for wheelchair access so that when the hurricanes come, people with disabilities that cannot just go to an ordinary shelter, they have special needs. Some come in stretchers, the ambulance bring them. And so by me having solar power on my facility, I'm able to contribute during times of disasters to groups who may not have no place to go. And the local actions, we don't have to boast about it. The people in the community know what's going on, and they come to you, They meet you in the supermarket, they meet you on the street. You know, you make yourself accessible. That's my values. I'm a people person, so you can stop me anywhere, you can call me, and I connect with you. And I always remember your needs so that when I come across information, I can, access. Just yesterday, when I was at the airport, immigration officer stopped me and said, I need solar for my container. I am having post-harvest technology. I need solar. So I had to, get his contact information. Another lady said, Miss Spence, I'm doing health and wellness. I need a place. So people now connect with you with just about every area, but you have to make the connections and see that they all relate to this environment, to this planet that we live. And so I know there may be donors and in the audience, people who want to build partnerships. We are limited in our capacity from an NGO background. We do a lot of work voluntarily. We don't have the big management structure sometimes that you determine when you're looking as a criteria for assisting local groups, but we have the commitment. And the commitment is what pushes up to the other level, because whereas somebody in government maybe with an 8 to 4 job, we are working around the clock, evenings, together trying to come up with common solutions to meet the challenges. So I would like, while I'm here, to build partnerships, to strengthen the network so that this common goal of keeping temperature levels down, it can be done also looking through the eyes of the NGOs and the women in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And I think that your comments in a way answer that question that Ambassador Thompson was asking in her intervention. We have to present that value-added proposition to private sector, and I think that you're living proof of it, like that innovative thinking that women bring to the marketplace. I would like to move on then to Rachel, and you're going to have a presentation, okay? And so what can women, how can women support each other in a male-dominated industry such as the energy sector?
Sure. And first of all, I want to thank Ambassador Thompson for being such a rock star, because it's 2019 and we're still having these conversations. And every once in a while, I think to myself, how is it 2019 and we're still having these conversations? So thank you, because you bring inspiration back. And I just have to tell a quick vignette that I have twin 9.5-year-old boys, and I hope this is not being live streamed and he can never watch this, but when one of them was 2.5, he went to nursery school with a little doll in his hands, and both of them were known as carrying their babies around for a good year because that's what they did. So I think the other benefit of having strong women and women who work is that they raise strong sons. And with that in mind, I want to thank all the men in this room, because without the men here, we're not going to ever find gender equity. And it's a really important piece, and I don't want to discount the women in the room, but without the men in the room, we're never going to find a place where we're going to get to women rising in the ranks, women finding the CEO, getting to CEO, and where women are comfortable speaking their mind. And I think that is such an important part, because women are CEOs, but they're not being replaced when they leave the CEO position, right? We know that women have been CEOs of utilities. When they leave, they're not replaced by women. And that is such a problem. It is so common. What was the meme that was going around earlier, that there are more Johns in the boardroom than there are, or CEOs, than there are women, like, period, for Fortune 500 companies. So that is a really huge problem. So the men in the room today, I just want to really give you a huge shout out, because you are part of the solution today. You already referenced all the statistics I was going to, but I'm going to put them in a little bit of order that will get me to the larger point, which is that we talked about 6% of energy companies have female CEOs. Utilities have them more than any other sector right now. 10% of CFOs are women in the energy sector. 13% of CMOs, which is shocking that only 13% of CMOs. You would think that that would be something that women that's a more natural fit. 35% of CIOs are women in the energy sector. And only 11% of senior execs in the oil and gas sector are women. But here's the most awesome statistic that I was told last night that I want like everyone in this room to memorize. 85% of the purchasing power in the United States is controlled by women. 85%. So if we were to put our minds to it, we could change all of those numbers because we have the control to do that. We control the dollars. And so we don't think about it that way, right? We go to Macy's, we go to Amazon, we just buy the things that we need because we think we need like the swim cap, right? And so that's what I needed yesterday. And so we go on Amazon and we buy whatever's easy. But if we thought about it and said, who's a women-owned company that we want to support and sponsor, then for putting aside the energy sector for a second, just sort of in the larger context, we would have more women as CEOs, we would have more women in leadership, we would have more women-owned businesses, and we would eventually crack the glass ceiling, and not just crack the glass ceiling, we would break the glass ceiling, because the problem with cracking the glass ceiling is we're putting these tiny little dents in it, and then they seal back over because, as I said, they're not being replaced because women are not replacing women in these positions, and so we're never gonna crack the glass ceiling if it's a one-off, right? If it's the woman is the CEO, and then that woman is not being replaced because the board doesn't think that we don't need to replace. We had that woman. We've done it. We need to find that pipeline. We need to be replacing that pipeline. So I'm here today to represent the Women's Energy Network. That was why we were asked to present. And the reason I thought that 85% statistic is so important is because one of the things that we found that was missing, and I'll speak to the DC space first and then kind of nationalize that a bit and then internationalize it, is that what you talked about, the natural just networking, right? The going out and grabbing a drink with people, the finding the opportunity when that job is open and John is right there, but instead of John, you had Jane. How do you do that? And there are all these groups in DC, right? And we have people from all different kinds of groups sitting right here, but there just wasn't what we found was missing about 10 years ago was just that really easy networking group where you could just find women from all different sectors, from lobbying, from the Hill, from the OAS if you want, from state. We have a lot of women from the Department of Energy, we have a lot of women from FERC, from different agencies across the DC spectrum, where you could just meet each other. And so when you had a job opening, it was a natural place to go and be like, I met this woman from so-and-so, I think she might be a good fit, let me reach out. And you could give also, you had a little bit of mentoring in there where that woman who, and I've had these conversations where the woman would be like, I think that might be a job for me 3 to 5 years from now. You could have the conversation where you could go, that's not how the men think, just apply and let them tell you no if you're not ready, right? Because that is a conversation that women have to have over and over and over again to get it into our skulls that we don't need to be 90% there to get the job when men are willing to apply. And no offense to the men in the room, men are willing to apply when they see a job opportunity that looks good to them, and they might be 10% of the way ready, but it just looks good, so they're gonna apply. Why should women tell themselves no before they are told no by the person who's doing the hiring? So there was a group that was based in Houston that's now 25 years old called the Women's Energy Network. And we decided to create a chapter here in DC in 2012. My kids were born in January of 2010. I said I had babies and then I had another baby. And we formed a chapter here in DC. We then formed chapters in New York. We had chapters in Chicago, in Appalachia, throughout kind of the oil and gas world, so like Permian Basin. And most excitingly for this room, we started a chapter in Mexico. So the first international chapter is actually in Mexico. We have about 25 or 30 women in Mexico who belong to this group. And the whole idea is to tie in and to really have a group who can reach out to each other and learn from each other and talk to each other and find ways to network and build out our network. So again, when that job opportunity that looks great comes up, we know who to reach out to. So that's the way we see from a soft, to your point of like, what is that soft touch to build the energy transition? We're not energy specific. It's not that we're just renewables or we're pretty much everything. But it's how do we help each other as women build up the confidence, teach each other where the jobs are, and give each other the access to those positions. So hopefully, with some of these networking kind of opportunities, we will help build both the boards, the jobs, and eventually really break that glass ceiling. And with that, I'll yield my time back.
Thank you, Rachel. And I was not aware of that 85% purchasing power that is controlled by women. And it brings me to think the following, and I'm walking on thin ice here, so I'm going to be careful what I'm going to say. But I think in a way, if you look at this number, 85% purchasing power controlled by women, then some things, women are tolerating some things. You know what I mean? Not that they accept it, but it's happening. And
We don't even know. I mean, did anyone here know that we control? I mean, we don't collectively know that we have that kind of power. So if we don't know it, then we collectively don't put it to. Oops, sorry. I'm not on a microphone. I think to the ambassador's point that if we don't collectively know something, we're not collectively leveraging something. So what are the facts about it's individual buying power, right? That's not a collective buying power. So it's not like we're going together and sitting there and saying, I need to go buy gas today. So where am I going to go? I mean, you're not making, it's based on that gas station that's around the corner. So I don't think that's we need to actually think about that and use that number to create a collective. And because we don't know that number, we don't think about that number, we don't know it to create a collective to make those decisions in a better way. And so we have to popularize that. I didn't know it until last night, so it's not something that I can say that is something that's in the public ethos.
thank you for that clarification. I would like to move on now to our next speaker, Anne-Marie. You spearheaded many efforts for girls and women in energy and STEM. What would you highlight as the program's biggest achievement? And I see that you have a presentation. Maybe you can tell us more about that. Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you, and thanks for the mood lighting for the event here. So I want to thank OAS and Jamaica for hosting this event. That's the purpose for these conversations today. So wanted to talk about the value of focusing on energy, careers, and gender in a positive light. So I work in public affairs, is my background. Right now I've been in the Office of Public Affairs of the Department of Energy for 2 years and at the agency for 10, and doing work on diversity, inclusion, women in STEM, et cetera, for those last 10 years. And so I wanted to talk to you a bit today about how we can use communications and outreach to engage more women in the issues that we've been talking about today, and particularly girls. So Sylvia Earle was speaking at an event. She's an amazing scuba diver, oceanographer, et cetera, and has a documentary called Mission Blue if you want to learn more. And she was speaking at an event in Dallas, which I'll speak about more, and she said, when you don't know you can't do something, it's amazing what you can do. So I think it's really important to frame getting women involved in STEM and women involved in energy in a positive light. So girls and women want careers that can truly make a difference in this world. And our time on Earth is finite. We should be using it to the best of our abilities as much as we all can. So what is the Department of Energy doing in this space? Working on a cleaner environment, global security, innovations in our healthcare through artificial intelligence, supercomputing, better living, how we get to work, how we commute, how we have a more energy efficient lifestyle in our homes, how we can be happier with how we're spending our money and our time. Science discoveries and an energy future for our children. I have a 1 and a 3-year-old, so this is important to me as well. So what we like to talk about in energy communications is see it and be it. And this is really the motto for the Gina Davis Institute. If you're all not familiar with that, I really recommend that as a resource in this space as well. They look at how Hollywood impacts women in STEM and STEM careers. And so this photo on the left is from the first all-women spacewalk that just occurred earlier this week, which is really exciting. And part of why it's exciting is because it shows girls around the globe that this is a possible future for them. You don't have to just dream for the stars. You can also walk amongst them. And I think it's really powerful to make sure that we're showcasing women in energy as much as we can. And you all in this room and on the live stream have the ability to do that yourselves, to come out here and sit on a panel, to be a spokesperson for women in energy, to go out to classrooms and volunteer. And that's what we try to engage people on at the Department of Energy. We have, I mentioned our Women at Energy profiles. We have about 100 on the site right now, but that's growing. Women in STEM at the U.S. Department of Energy has 17 national labs all across the country. We have staff abroad, and we have hundreds of, if not thousands of women who work in STEM at our national labs and our program offices. So we have profiles on this website, talk about what they do, what inspired them, what advice they have to get other people interested in STEM, and what they do in their spare time. If you do outreach, a lot of people want to know that you are also a person, that you have interests and hobbies and careers outside of your job, and that's critically important to showcase as we're doing outreach. And then on another image here on the slide here is a classroom poster series. We invented one. This is not ours, but we have one at the Department of Energy as well, showcasing women in STEM for classroom use. And so the more materials you can make about those kind of things, showcasing women and your organizations doing energy work, that's an effective tool for outreach as well. And just having images up in classrooms, in learning settings, informal and formal. Also wanted to talk about visibility. This matters. There's a study, the Scully effect. So Scully was on X-Files, and 2/3 of women who are in STEM today were inspired to go there by Scully. 2/3. So imagine if there were more Scullys, if there were more women in STEM in that entertainment is showing, how many more women there might be today in STEM careers and energy. So I'm kind of using those interchangeably. But and that study was done by the Gina Davis Institute that I mentioned. The NIH director, this is from 2018, just in June, he put a statement forward that he was not going to be on any more manels. Have you all heard this term before? Manels means an all-male panel. So if you're at an energy event, conferences, that kind of thing, and typically it's man, 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 man up on the stage, you can look at pictures, you'll see this happening. We need to change that. And like my co-panelists were saying, men play a critical role in that. Rachel was just talking about that we need men to step up and say, no, I will not be on a panel that is only other males. I would like to see some diversity in this as well. So the NIH director said he was doing that, and I want to promote that as a way to, in communications at least, and in your outreach, to make a stance. And then want to talk about She Can STEM. This is a really great initiative that's going on. This is a screenshot of their current Instagram page. And one of the quotes over on the top left, never let the fear of failing stop you from taking on your next challenge. That's from our senior advisor of our nuclear energy office, Susie Jaworski. And so we've been feeding them quotes and information, but these are from women all across the country, and you could also be in touch with them. #SheCanSTEM on Instagram. That's their primary activation point for this campaign. Really, they and we as well are focusing on how can we show middle school girls women in STEM, because middle school is really a sticking point in women and girls at that point being interested as an equal rate as boys in STEM, and then deciding that it is for them. They are going to pursue it. They're going to take the classes in high school that they need to get into the STEM pipeline, right? So we're starting showing profiles as young as that age. So then this is another really exciting program. This is what Sylvia Earle was speaking at earlier this week, and it's going on right now, actually, if you want to pop into their hashtag on Instagram and Twitter, if then she can. So the Lytle Hill Philanthropies, they invested 25 million so far into doing STEM outreach to get girls interested in STEM by showing women in STEM as role models. So there are 125 AAAS and if then women role models, and 5 of them are from U.S. Department of Energy National Labs. So we're proud that we have some of our spokespeople as part of this campaign. And they were hearing from a lot of amazing women this week, but they're also getting media training, they're making press packages, they're getting DIY video skills training, they're working on they have professional headshots, and they're getting their makeup and hair done, and they're looking their finest, and being prepared to do public outreach, getting trained on how to talk to a middle schooler, how to engage. And so this is something that we're excited that some of our staff are involved in, and our solar decathlon director, Holly, was in the room, but she had to leave a moment ago. But she and I were just talking today about doing STEM outreach and spokespeople. So to answer your question about what I'm most proud of, it's our C3E initiative and taking that international. So C3E, and our C3E ambassador was also in the room. I had to depart, Maria, for our US initiative. We're trying to advance women's clean energy education and empowerment. And it was launched in 2010 at the Clean Energy Ministerial. And so we had an international component. The United States was very active. And then I was involved in relaunching it through the International Energy Agency as a technology collaboration program, basically making it a way for any other country to get involved in the international portfolio. So these are the goals of the international program on the screen. Canada, Sweden are the leads. The United States has joined actually fairly recently, formally, but we have a leadership role in that as well. And they have a campaign, if you would like, your company is involved in promoting women in STEM, please say so publicly. There's an Equal by 30 campaign, so equal opportunities, pay, and leadership. And I think it's important that we put that out publicly. So just to wrap up, I work on communications at the Department of Energy. We have a website on what all of our national labs are doing for women and girls in STEM. Outreach, I mentioned, is really important, putting people in front of classrooms. So there's just some photos of our work in that space. We have a downloadable coloring book. We've done podcasts on our work. We try to jump into moments wherever we can, like International Day of the Girl, that was October 11th, and make sure people see that women in STEM and that we're active in this space. Elena from our International Affairs Office is here and has also been spearheading an effort through APEC and getting more women trained on energy entrepreneurship. So we're doing a lot in this space. So, and of course, you can follow us online. I think they would fire me if I don't say that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And let's talk about C3E and see if we can have a space for you at the side event. And obviously, at the side event at the Ministerial, and obviously any organization who wants to partake can do so. I'm talking more with you because it's DOE, it's US government, and our main constituents at the OAS are obviously governments, but there will be space in Montego Bay next year for side events by other types of organizations, multilats, and of course the private sector. You mentioned awareness, and I think that's very important. And I think it's important for both sides, both for women and for men. I like the manuals, time to end the manuals. You know, many men may not be aware that they are contributing unwillingly to this issue. And then, well, we had the example before about women maybe not being aware of their purchasing power and what they can do and how they can affect change. So I would like to move on to our last panelist for today. Lauren, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I also, so my name is Lauren Glickman, and I am here today speaking on behalf of Women of Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy. I'm a consultant with RISE, and I have had the amazing experience to be able to work with them for the last 7 years, and am excited to share the work that they're doing, and how all of you in the room can get involved and focusing on solutions I'm excited also about the fact that I don't have to be up here and give you all the statistics about the work that we have to do, because all of my speakers before me have illustrated that very eloquently, that obviously there's a lot of work to be done. This problem isn't going to solve itself, but RISE is actively working in this space and growing as an organization to provide companies and individuals solutions that they can, steps that they can take to address the gender gap in the renewable energy space. And so for those that are unaware, and I realize I just went from a light screen to a dark one, so I apologize for the lighting. But RISE is a national nonprofit that operates in the US and Canada right now. We have 2 full-time staff and some consulting support, but there are 35 plus chapters across the US and Canada actively supporting our mission, which is to promote the education, professional development, and advancement of women to achieve a strong, diversified workforce and support a robust renewable energy economy. And so, as I said, the facts before me speak for themselves, that this is a critical piece in addressing climate change and having a successful renewable energy economy. We cannot solve this problem without a diverse and inclusive workforce, and women have a huge role to play. So RISE's work focuses on recruiting more women into the renewable energy workforce. Once we have them, retaining and advancing these amazing women that are already in the renewable energy space, and then changing our energy future through engagement, visibility, and the actions of women. One of the most amazing, if not the most amazing part of the RISE organization is our network. So at this point, we're over 10,000 people strong. We have over 1,000 individual members. We have dozens, if not hundreds, of companies that are involved at varying levels. But the beginning of RISE started with how can we give more people access to this network. And so that started with our fellowship program, bringing college age and recent graduates to some of the largest events that the industry that take place every year. So in our instance, it was at Wind Power. And since the inception of the program, we've brought over 100 women to these trade shows. Many of them have continued on to very successful careers across the industry. And we continue to expand how these fellowship programs work. In 2016, we launched a Wind at Our Backs Fellowship, which was focused on women in technical careers. As you zoom in on the various parts of the gender gap, it tends to get larger. And so for wind technicians, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there are very few female wind techs. And so we brought 6 women technicians to the show in 2016. In 2017, as we expanded our program work to focus on all renewable technologies, we launched a fellowship for Solar Power International, bringing women to the annual solar trade show. And it's a really, if you don't believe the future is bright, it's just sitting at a table with these women now twice a year. I am in awe of just the amazing work that these women are already doing. And so being able to support them and bring them into the workforce is a pretty amazing opportunity. We also have a mentoring program. We have a couple of different ways to plug into mentoring. We have a one-on-one mentoring opportunity where you can, scroll through all of our active mentors that are available to take on mentees and find the person who is right for you, connect with them, and forge that relationship in a way that works for both of you. A few years ago, in 2015, it feels like just a few years ago, but I guess 4 years ago, we launched a new program that's called peer group mentoring. We realized that a lot of the benefits of mentorship can actually come in a small group dynamic in ways that you don't get in one-on-one. And this year, we had over 150 people sign up for our peer group program. The groups were just announced, and it goes through a 6-month sort of guided conversation. Last year, I actually participated for the first time, and it was just a really amazing, and I came back to do it again this year to make connections that are really invaluable, learn about some of the things that might be holding you back in your career, and it's a amazing, one of the amazing programs. And then also just going beyond mentoring, as it says on here, just looking at as already has been mentioned, sort of the difference between mentoring and sponsoring and championing. I have a holistic view of mentoring that I think as a mentor, I champion and sponsor women as well, but there are some distinctions. Some other professional development opportunities. We have an annual leadership forum. This is an amazing, and it continues to grow event. It started as a half-day forum, and now it's almost 2.5 days. But it is an amazing conference that happens once a year. There are professional development opportunities, skill sessions, the networking, and last year it did sell out for the first time ever, which was a great, but also a problem to have. And so this year we've gotten a larger space. We're gonna be in Austin in February. There's information on the website, but we do anticipate we might sell out again. But it is just a really amazing, inspirational, empowering few days and it will definitely help you in your career, regardless of where you are. We put on a webinar series all throughout the year. We have different skill training sessions. We have a Take Charge initiative on how do we have women, speaking at the forefront on all of these critical advocacy issues that we're seeing. We are in the process of building a speakers database to combat the mantle problem, one conference and one conference organizer at a time. But there is an amazing, wealth of women available on every single topic that you could possibly conceive of. There is no reason in 2019 you should ever be at a conference in the renewable energy space, I'll say at any conference, but specifically in the renewable energy space, and have to listen to a mantle. Unless it's a single speaker. We can have male keynotes, that's fine. But if there are more than one speaker on the stage, one of them should be a woman. And so we're working on a speaker database to help get those women's names out there in a more proactive way, and also provide some of the tools. Sometimes the abstract submission process can feel unwieldy, especially if you're busy in your career. So how do we provide people with the tools so that they are submitting themselves for these opportunities? And so that brings me to sort of the last piece of what I'll talk about is RISE does have an initiative that they launched called Find Her, Keep Her on recruiting and retaining women in renewables. And through the process of developing this program, they developed what they're calling an institutional top 10, which are the areas that companies and organizations can focus on to improve diversity and inclusion across the sector. And also providing a forum where people can share the stories of what they are experiencing, because that's a key role, is understanding the individual experience to organizational success and helping us move forward and change the face of renewable energy. So there are 10 things. I could spend a half day talking about each one of those 10 things. So I'm just going to briefly touch upon them. There's more information on our website, including a webinar where they dove very deeply into all of them. But, so these are the 10. I'm not gonna read them all out, but I'll start with, starting with data. So you cannot improve your diversity in your company if you don't know where you are. If you don't have a baseline to know what areas you're tracking, track them. If you aren't tracking, start tracking today, and then you can always get better. And if you're not getting better, then you can figure out why and look at the individual data points to help improve the process. From your data, set goals. It is amazing how powerful that can be. So as I mentioned, I'm a consultant. One of my clients, when I started working with them, was a startup. They had 4 founders, 3 of which were white male, all 4 were male. And so as they were building their company, it was extremely important to them that scenario didn't remain the same. And so they were very intentional, and now 5 years after their founding, they have a staff of about 12 people, and they're actually majority women. So, being intentional about it and setting a goal of what you want to do to track and engage your leadership on how you can improve is incredibly important. Corporate culture. So I'm going to dive a little bit more into implicit and explicit biases, but there is obviously a conversation that needs to be had, both with men and women, and building valuable affinity networks within your company can help do that. But how women are spoken to, setting the tone, and a lot of that starts at the leadership, but some of it also can come from the bottom up. And so what I'm going to focus the most on is hiring and recruitment, because that's the question I get the most, is that people feel that women just aren't applying for these positions. So what do we do about it? So in a lot of cases, so it's hard to fix implicit bias, right? So if you don't know that you're being biased, if you don't realize that it's the sound of a woman's heels on the floor that have already handicapped her from getting a position, it's really hard to fix that. And so, this is just an example, both gender and race, how both of those things play into the hiring process. And it is incredibly important since some of this is implicit, to be intentional in terms of how you recruit your candidates. And so this is just a very limited, but I think it starts in the beginning. So obviously there are steps all along the way where you need to be intentional, but the first place is to make sure you have a diverse candidate pool. And so some ways to do that, one is to actually limit referral hiring. And this comes as a surprise to people because you always want to tap into your networks. But if your network in your company is mostly white and male, and you tap into your existing network, you're going to get a candidate pool that is mostly white and male. So limiting the amount of, and also sometimes referral hiring is just easier. If someone puts someone right in front of you, it's, why do I have to look any further? And so limiting that intentionally on the onset will help you reach a wider audience, making sure that you're tapping into diverse networks. There are a lot of job boards and career centers out there. RISE has a job board that does get out to a pretty wide audience, but also HBUCs have great, so there are lots of ways that you can intentionally put your job out there to a different, to get the word out more broadly. An interesting thing is to be thoughtful in your word choice. It's amazing actually in just how you craft a job description can actually result in different types of candidates applying for your job. There's a lot of science behind it. I can't rattle them all off, but one of the things that if you require leadership experience and use the word specifically leadership in there, you are less likely to have female applicants apply for your job. So there are ways that you can be thoughtful and intentional in just how you are marketing the position you're looking for that will recruit a broader and more diverse set of applicants. And then the last piece might seem intuitive, but you should actually insist that you have a diverse pool of applicants. It's not, before you even begin reviewing and interviewing people, if all of the candidates have come in, don't check that box, then you need to continue recruiting. So if you make these things requirements, that'll help you start at the beginning of the career pipeline in terms of recruiting a more diverse candidate pool. And then the last piece that I will talk on, because I think it's something that sometimes is a little bit taboo, is pay and salary transparency. The companies that are actually doing the most proactive work in this front are seeing a more diverse and inclusive workforce. Salesforce is a big example. You can actually Google what they've done to address their pay disparities, both in terms of gender and race. And it's a lot of money that they've put for it, but they've also been very transparent in how they're doing it. And I think it's important that people talk about, you're not gonna know that you're making less if people don't talk about it. So having those conversations and having those policies in place in a transparent way are very important. And so there are obviously just, so there are some other things on the top 10 list, but a lot of them do come down to implicit bias. And so there's a great tool that's available out there called Bias Interrupters. They have toolkits that actually help you proactively combat or address some of the implicit bias that exists and ways to just do it in a concrete and measurable way. And so these, as I said, bias might start in that, how do I get that big pool of candidates? but it goes throughout the entire pipeline of being employed somewhere. So areas that are prone to bias are performance review, hiring and recruiting, how you assign work, how meetings happen, and how compensation is divvied out. And so the Bias Interrupters actually has toolkits for addressing each of these segments that I definitely encourage people to look at. Also, RISE is in the process of building out white papers on each of these institutional recommendations, so something to stay tuned for in the future. But so some of just the big takeaways to bring it back to the larger discussion is that the renewable energy workforce and highest decision-making tables still significantly lack women. And more women, and in particular, women of color, are desperately needed at all levels if we want to see successful and long-lasting results. And I assume we're all here because we want to see successful and long-lasting results, and we're really at a critical point to make that happen. And everyone, every single person in this room, every single person back at the company you work for who came here, has a role to play in building out this workforce and the clean energy future we want and need. And so I will make just a final plug. If you were not familiar with RISE before today, welcome. And you should go to riseenergy.org. You can follow us on Twitter. We have all the other social media channels as well. But you know, we want everyone involved. I am also the chapter leader of our DC chapter, which is became reinvigorated in the last few years. So we have lots of activities, fun crew, and that's the end. I think I'm not too far over.
Thank you. And when we started working on energy and gender at the OAS, you know, we started and we said, well, are people going to be interested in this topic? Is there an audience for this? And we were a little bit concerned at the beginning. And then we started talking to people, and we had the prep meetings, and we had the steering committee meetings. And we found that there is this whole universe of women and men working on this, looking at this, and paying attention to this. So it was both a relief and really also we were happy to see that, because we always thought that this was something worth discussing, especially in the context of the OAS, the Organization of American States. I would like to open the floor to questions from the audience, if any. Yes. Can we give a microphone to Lucrecia, please? Thank you. Thanks. I should have done that.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Thank you. My name is Lucrecia. I work in the Department of Human Development and Education and Employment with scholarships. And now we are seeing a lot of female applicants, and that made me so happy. And I just want to congratulate the Department of Sustainable Development and all the amazing women present here, all in the audience too, that we are doing something. And that makes me think that the future will be brighter for the little ones. As a woman growing up in Guatemala and going to the university in the 70s, I was the only woman in biology. And then I became a professor, and then I realized that there are more women over there, and I'm so happy about it. Thank you, and I applaud you all.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the ambassadors and to all our speakers today, and for organizing this important event. I have a question about some of the biases, the inherent biases. And Ambassador Thompson mentioned that you could have a very qualified, more qualified female candidate. And when you have a quota system, while there may be some merits, despite the qualifications, the assumption is the woman was hired only because of the quota. How do you overcome these kinds of biases? Aside from, we know we have to address corporate culture, but in a more immediate term, what steps can be taken by companies, HR policies to help overcome that? Because then that permeates throughout the workplace and how that woman is treated. Thank you.
Who wants to take the question?
So none of the work we have to do ahead of us is easy. If it was, we wouldn't be doing it. It would just happen. But some ways to address that, I think, are in the performance and evaluation process. And depending on how that is set up, showcasing that there's transparency. I mean, I think innately being a new person on any job can be challenging, but especially when you feel like maybe that everyone's looking at you, that you are hired, that you're a diversity hire, which is a terrible word. So, you know, being able to showcase the work that people are doing in your company. So just from day one, when people are doing really great work, being able to highlight that can help sort of change the conversation to showcase the great work that people are doing across the board. And that can come at any level within the workforce. There was a great story that I was with a woman I met who had just started at an investment firm straight out of college. And she was sitting in her first meeting and they were going through the numbers, and she noticed actually that the numbers they were running at a very large investment firm were wrong. And she raised her hand and said so. That, you know, she's like, I can do the math right here in my head and these numbers don't add up. And she was able to do that because the place that she worked, you know, encouraged that type of dialogue in all of their meetings. And so how you set up your meetings to encourage new people to be able to contribute, how you evaluate performance and showcase that in a way that makes sense. And obviously you have to be thoughtful. When people are getting negative performance reviews, that's not necessarily something you want to broadcast across your firm. But being able to share those stories and experiences, I think, can help at least begin the conversation of trying to change those company cultures, if that helps.
Thank you.
Yes, first and foremost, I want to thank everybody because you are very great panelists. We are learning a lot, and thanks for welcome the gentlemen that are also joining the conversation today. I would like to comment, and I would like to ask something. In the case of my country, Nicaragua, we've been going through a lot of things, and we were glad when you mentioned that we were in the top 5 in gender participation. And we've been going through a process in terms of use of renewable energy. Just for instance, in 2006, we just have like 25% of renewable energy in our energy matrix. That was in 2006. And then in 2019, we are like 60% of renewable energy using solar, geothermal, wind. And women have been critical in this process. And most of the solar panels that we've been distributing in the Caribbean coast have been delivered to women heads of household. And maybe because of that, we have having very good results because women know how to use the technology for the benefit of the whole family, you know. And that's very important because most of the household are in charge of women, and they are doing a lot of things. We also have a program called Mujeres Solares. That's an NGO that is promoting solar energy among women. And when you mentioned the partnerships, we love that because, for instance, India has done cooperation with a barefoot project, Universidad Pies Descalzos, which works especially with women, and they've been teaching women how to use solar panels, how to prepare to construct solar panels, and that's very, very exciting for us. And like I said to you, right now we are 60% renewable energy, and women's have been critical to achieve that. And I would like to know, like for instance, in the Caribbean, we use a lot solar, but if you think there are other ways like wind or a small hydro that can be useful in this process, in the Caribbean, I would like you to answer that. Thank you.
I think right now solar is the most best, especially for households. We don't have no hydro. The wind is up and down. The utility company says that all the time, the wind is up and down. But how do you provide the panels? I mean, is it through a revolving loan fund? How are the families chosen?
Well, we have a program called Penecer, which is a program that promotes renewable energy and solar panels for most of peoples that is off the grid. And they are for free. They don't have to pay for that because it's a program that works with women that have like 6 children sometimes. There's no men there, you know, but women are in charge. And the programs is not just for having electricity, but it helps to create small businesses. It helps with education. It helps with the reduction of firewood, which is a serious problem in our countries. Caribbean countries and Central America are very poor, and we use a lot of firewood. But now with solar, health is better, and education is improving, and small businesses are growing. And that's for me, when you mentioned that, we were glad to hear that.
Okay, that's good. We need to connect.
Yeah, and wind energy is also in some countries in the Caribbean has been very effective. In Jamaica, for example, every time Prime Minister Holness speaks about renewables, talks about solar, of course, and wind. Dominican Republic has had some good experiences too. But right now, the new wave is solar because the prices have gone down dramatically over the last 5 years, I would say. I mean, if we compare prices of today, as they were 10 years ago, we're talking about a 65 to 70% drop in price. So it's quite significant.
And I would just add also that storage is growing as a resource, especially in many islanded nations. So solar plus storage is, you could play a drinking game about it if you go to any energy conference, and you might not make it till the end of the day. But it's very, the price, the ability to connect them, is definitely a growing segment of the market.
Do we have any other question or comment? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thanks everyone. They were really interesting presentations and comments. It's a bit of a comment and maybe hopefully a question to you, Juan, at the end. A lot of the discussion today, maybe Ruth with the exception of you, was about women in the workforce and women in the energy sector. And my understanding of this session and also going forward, gender and energy as part of the discussion in 2020 is gender and energy, gender equality, gender sensitive, gender considerations, gender responsiveness within the energy sector. And I've done a lot of work with a lot of the countries, and I think that it's going to be really critical to move beyond just the conversation of women in energy, which is absolutely critical, but we need to also make sure that the discussion, especially in 2020, will be about that gender responsiveness, because we need to take into consideration the women and groups that are on the ground that need to have more of a gender responsive approach to these energy systems and structures that are going to be absolutely imperative, are going to be the systems that are going to create the transformational change that we need in climate change and promote social justice and climate justice. And I think especially around the fact of the renewal and the revision of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions that the countries are going to be coming up with in 2020, and also in consideration of the new, hopefully approved gender action plan in the UNFCCC this next, this year in Chile. And so do you have any insights on what the discussion maybe will be more around that, or are countries talking about that? Is that going to be part of the dialogue discussion? And maybe this is just a jumping off point and it's not quite there yet. And so if there isn't a response, then maybe just as a little flag to remember that to get more of a dynamic conversation about the different elements of gender equality within energy, and not just about women in the workforce, which is absolutely imperative.
So we started with gender and energy because we saw that this was something countries identified. And so we did our own homework and we asked around and we realized, yes, there is a space for this, and this is something that countries want to address and that is of interest. Then we looked a little bit further and then we realized, well, wait a minute, this is more about just women, this is gender, which is a little bit more broad. And we know something's going to happen in Chile. We don't know what exactly. So after Chile, we want to see what the results are. And then, since we're convening after COP25 in Santiago, then that will give us a chance to get ready to tackle the issues more specifically. And so if we put together something, and we really hope that we're going to have some champions occupying those spaces, and if not, we'll occupy ourselves, the OAS. But we really hope for others also to partake in this discussion, then we will be able to go down to the nitty-gritty and see, okay, what do we talk about? So, because it's women and energy, sure, but it's also women and it's also energy and gender, and what specific issues should be addressed. And but we need to see what's going to happen in a couple of months, and we need to also align our governments and see which ones will be up to the task of addressing those issues.
One comment I'd like to make. In Antigua, we have one female cabinet member, Honorable Samantha Marshall. And I always tell her, your ministry is what impacts people. All these conventions that the government has signed on to, people development is at the heart of it. And she comes to our NGO forums and she motivates us, develop more groups. You have to hold governments accountable. What I find out with the Climate Change Convention is that if I want to put forward a recommendation, I cannot get into the portal, so I always have to go through the focal point to have inputs. And I think it should be more inclusive, more open. You know, if you don't wear the party badge, how are you going to make a contribution? So we have to look at pathways for more local women, you know, who are actually underground doing things for them to be able to participate in these events. And that's why I'm very glad that I'm here, that you have given me a voice. And there are many more voices that could be included, and we appreciate this effort.
You're welcome, and I would like also to mention that Ruth's story was featured in one of ECPA newsletters. I think it was last year, so I encourage you to take a look. Finally, and we're out of time, so I have to close now, but before I do, I'll be remiss not to mention something that in this ECPA process that we're implementing, everyone we've been working with in Jamaica for the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas Ministerial is a woman. Ambassador Marks, Minister Faival Williams of Energy. Our focal point is a woman. And a group of people both at Science, Energy and Technology and Foreign Affairs in Kingston, all women. There's only one guy. That's it. I'm the only one. So, you know, I'm glad to see that, and you know, I think it also goes to show that the changes can be done and that they're happening. You know, every process has a step to recovery. So if there is a problem, whether it's those famous 12 steps to recovery, the first one is recognizing there is a problem. And I think that recognition does exist today. So it's a start, but it's a lot. There is a lot to be done. And I think some of our panelists mentioned it. We're still having the same discussions we were having 25, 30 years ago. Yes, but at least it's not just women having these discussions. Now men are paying attention too, and changes are being made. Not at the pace we want them to be made, certainly not. And I think Ambassador Thompson made that very clear. But it's a start, and hopefully in the next years, and sooner rather than later, we're going to be able to see the change that we want to see happening faster. I would like to mention we're going to have our next dialogue on resilience. It's going to be on November 5. It's going to be here at the OAS as well, and stay tuned in for future announcements. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and please a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.